All right, so here we go. Welcome to the Share. I'm your host. My name is Mark, and today on the show, I've got Terry here. Welcome, Terry.
Well, thank you, Mark.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
being here.
No problem. Hey, the recovery band wants to say hi.
Okay. Hi, band.
Whoop, where are they at?
All right.
Studio audience, too.
I like the studio audience.
I know, right? They'll clap for anything.
All right.
So Terry, it's good to see you tonight. How have you been?
I have been well, thank you. It's a holiday weekend, and I have been off for a couple days.
Oh, awesome.
And I took 2 naps this afternoon.
2 naps.
Which you start to do when you get to be my age.
I was wondering why you were driving so fast here to the office. I was like, man, Terry really gets around town.
Yeah, well, see, I wanted to get back so I could go back to bed.
Oh, there you go. Well then let's hurry this up.
Okay, we'll hurry it up.
So Terry, how many years in recovery do you have?
47 right now.
Wow, and that's continuous?
That's continuous.
Wow. Wow, that's a lot.
But I wasn't always well, I think is what I want to say.
Okay.
You know, people say, wow, and I think, but you know, there were years and years and years where it didn't seem like it was going that well. And it was because of things that I was or wasn't doing that now I understand. But at the time, I had no clue. You know, when I look back on it and people say, when did you really start to feel comfortable in sobriety? It was probably at 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Because for a number of years when I first got here, I was unwilling to let go of control.
Really?
And that, I think, is really important because I'm working with a guy right now who's been sober a year and a half, and he has exactly the same problem. And he's having all sorts of issues because he doesn't trust people. But he doesn't trust people because they don't treat him right. And they don't treat him right because he has expectations of how he thinks the world ought to work.
Wow.
And I had expectations of how I thought the world ought to work too. And I worked really, really hard at making them work out.
Oh, wow. Your will.
My world, yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of people, you know, would think after I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, when my life became unmanageable, and it was unmanageable because I was a recreational drunk driver, you know, and so I would go out to party, and then you have to drive home. And if you do that enough, the police take notice, and sometimes they wonder what's going on. And so I eventually found myself unexpectedly being sent off to treatment because I got my second DUI, and before I could go to court to tell the judge it would never happen again, I got my third. And that seemed like the worst possible thing that could happen at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I should have understood from the very get-go that I didn't know what was good for me. Because as a direct result of that, I'm sitting here over 40 years later and I'm okay. But for years, I thought that that was a problem, see.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that, and I think this makes sense in a certain way. People would say to me, you need to do something about your drinking, it's causing problems. And so in my mind, I figured if I didn't drink, the problems would go away, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it
absolutely
makes sense.
Yeah, just don't drink and go to meetings, right?
Right. And so I just didn't drink, and it felt worse.
Well, I can identify with that because when I first got into recovery, I wasn't drinking or drugging and just going to meetings. And all of a sudden, those things called feelings came about, and I didn't know how to deal with anything.
Right. Well, that's part of it. And part of it is that I just wanted to make life work out the way I thought it ought to work out. Mm. And I thought that if people would just act right and do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
things would be fine
Mm-hmm.
and people wouldn't act right. I don't know if you've ever run across that.
Oh, what so you're talking about playing God.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you're gonna do what I want you to do, and you should act the way that I think that you should act.
Let me tell you about my relationships. My relationships generally lasted for 90 days. You could almost time them. And we would get together and we would go out, but we always went out where I wanted to go to do what I wanted to do. And I would drive and we'd listen to what I wanted to listen to on the radio. And we'd leave when I wanted to leave. And that was the end of it. I figured that was good.
Yeah.
I was being nice. And eventually, the other person would try and pull away a little bit. And I would feel that as a threat. So I would try and hold on tighter.
Ooh.
And they would feel that as a threat. So they'd try and pull away harder. And you can see where this goes. And
And the
at the end
cycle
of 90
continues.
days, it all fell apart. And the cycle continues. And that was true for romantic relationships, but I mean, my thought process was the same for all relationships, you know, because I was smart and I knew what you wanted. I was pretty sure that I knew what people generally wanted out of life. And if they would just do what I told them to do, it would work.
Wow.
Wow.
That reminds me of at the bottom of page 417 going into 418, you know.
Does it?
Yeah, it does. It does remind me of that.
It doesn't. Okay.
Yeah. And and it's 60 to 61 and so much more.
And so much more. Well, and more eventually happened, you know, because when I go through life with that mindset, what happens is I cannot drink. And if I'm going to meetings, I can still look pretty okay. I sponsored lots of people then, and God's power runs deep because some of them are still sober today.
Oh, wow.
And what I had to come to finally accept was that my way didn't work, you know. And being the controlling type person that I am, the only way that happened was when the police finally asked to talk to me and talk to me about some stuff that I had been doing sober. And the next thing I knew, I was in the joint doing a 2-year bit, kicking it with the brothers, you know.
Wait, how many years sober?
At 17, yeah.
Wow.
And I stayed sober in the joint. It was fun. I walked into my first AA meeting in prison, and someone across the room yelled, "Hey, Terry."
Nuh-uh.
Yeah. A guy I had known 15 years before at the clubhouse that I got sober at.
Was he in jail sober too?
He was doing 25 years.
What?
And had done 15 of it.
Wow.
And his brother's a conference speaker and a good friend of mine. And so it was cool, you know, to see people that I knew, and I was able to stay sober through that, you know, and a lot of people think that that's not possible, but it certainly is.
Can I ask you real quick, what were the AA meetings in jail like as compared to the meetings that are out kind of here in the world?
Some of them were actually fairly good. I mean, people would come in from outside and they would set up a meeting, and those of us who had been to meetings before, you know, sort of followed along with it. Certainly there were a lot of people who were there who had not been sober outside, or who had been referred to meetings and hadn't stayed sober outside. And there were a lot of people who were there just to make brownie points with the administration.
Parole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it was helpful to a lot of people. It was very similar to meetings in, you know, out in the world. And they were certainly a lifeline for me and for everybody else in there. So if you have a chance to be involved in that, I certainly encourage anyone who has the opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. Now, do you feel that your recovery got stronger because of that moment going to jail?
I do.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. I was out on the yard one day. It was about a year into this 2-year bit. It was a pretty day in June. I was looking out through the fence, and the thought came to me that apparently I couldn't run life when I was drunk, and I couldn't run life when I was sober either.
Wow.
And that finally convinced me to do what people have been asking me to do for 17 years. I finally did the third step.
So you'd only done the first 2 steps in 17 years?
No, I had done 4 steps and 5th steps and those sorts of things, but
Okay.
I hadn't been willing to let go of control.
Oh.
And, it's possible to do that. Yeah. And so I threw my hands up in the air and said, all right, God, I give up. You deal with all this stuff. I'm not going to deal with it anymore. And that's worked for me since.
Could you hear God saying, it's about time, Terry?
I didn't actually hear him say that, but circumstances turned out to indicate that.
Okay.
When I got out, I had been in prison in Ohio where I got sober, and then moved to North Carolina for a while, and then eventually moved to Florida. And when I moved down to Florida, I picked up a new sponsor who had been sober not quite as long as I have. Technically, I suppose he's a spiritual advisor, but he's smarter than I am and understands this stuff a lot better. And he said to me, I see that you're still having problems with control, and I don't know how my life at 40 years sober could have made someone say that, but that's what he saw looking at me.
Did he have less time than you?
Yeah, he has 3 years less than I do.
3 years less than you do?
And,
okay.
But he's a conference speaker, and he flies all over the world.
Wow.
In fact, right now he's on a plane to Australia for a conference. So
Nice.
he said, what I want you to do is what it says in the 11th step. Every morning I want you to ask God for the knowledge of his will for you and the power to carry it out. And just leave it at that. Don't ask for anything else for yourself. Don't ask for anything for anybody else. Just ask for the knowledge of God's will for you and the power to carry it out and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't think it would work. But of course, I had to try it to show him that it wouldn't work.
That seems like the kind of alcoholic mindset. Like, I don't know if this is a good idea because I didn't think of it.
Right, exactly. But I tried it. And I've been doing it ever since. And my experience in doing it is that, odd as this sounds, it works just fine.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, it works if you work it?
That's what I thought. I thought, that doesn't sound like a very powerful way to make life work out the way it ought to.
Yeah.
But apparently God has an idea as to how he thinks the world ought to run, even with me in it.
Wow.
And so when I do that every day and go to a meeting every day, what I find is that life seems to work a lot easier.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about outcomes anymore,
Wow.
because the outcome's up to God. If I do the prayer, I have to accept that whatever happens is what's supposed to happen. Otherwise I'm wasting my time and God's time even doing the prayer. So that means if something good happens, that's great. If the dog dies, the dog was supposed to die, And we all go through that sooner or later, if you stick around here long enough. I've had dogs die and parents die, and I had a foster kid die once of a drug overdose. And that didn't seem like what would be the right thing to happen, but I have to believe that what goes on is what's supposed to go on.
Yeah. That seems like nothing in God's world happens by mistake. It sounds like total acceptance.
Exactly.
And so, going through that, even with years and years and years of recovery, when you live in acceptance, how do you feel that it does to your mind state, get you through those things?
I think it makes me a lot more willing to believe that whatever happens is supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me more willing to understand that if someone I'm working with is having a problem, that that's something that they're supposed to work through.
Yeah.
You know, that I am not going to have answers for people. All I have is the experience to share, and they have to come up with their own answers.
Yeah, your experience.
Right.
Now that doesn't mean that you don't negate those feelings of grief, right? You process all the feelings.
No, I think you have to process the feelings in order to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, you don't have that pink cloud experience where just everything's all just like, oh, you know, whatever happened, but
Yeah, well, if you're going to live on a pink cloud, you better have a little pink parachute.
Yes, this is very true. What he is saying, you can bank on about that. So before you got, you know, sober and then into recovery, what was it like before you ever came into the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous? Like what was the defining moment where you said, I have to do this. I need to do something.
Oh, okay. I hadn't really thought about that for a while, but it's what I said at the beginning. You know, I got my second DUI, and before I could go to court and tell the judge it would never happen again, I got my third, you know. And that wasn't something that I knew was going to be sustainable. Because, you know, when I get pulled over for a DUI, even back then, you know, you go to jail, you can't go to work, you know, you can't make the payment on the car, you can't make the payment on the apartment. It's not a sustainable way of living. And I understood that it wasn't sustainable.
Yeah.
And I had to just give up.
Did you wonder how you had gotten to that point?
No.
No.
I didn't ever question how I had gotten there. I knew how I had gotten there. I had a lot of fun drinking every night.
Do you remember your first drink?
I do not.
You do not?
You know. And I don't remember my last drink because I was a blackout drinker.
Oh, wow.
You know? I know where I probably was. I know the bar I was probably at.
Okay.
You know. But I don't remember specifics.
Yeah.
And I don't think, despite some stories I've heard otherwise, I don't think that's necessary. What I have to understand is that I don't have answers to the problems that I find in my life. And when I get to that point, then I can become willing to listen to somebody else.
Wow. Yeah, that's, I found that you have to learn to listen and listen to learn.
There you go. Sounds good.
It does.
Do it. Practice it.
Practice it. Live it. And,
live it.
And that when I become unteachable, I'm kind of screwed.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so, how do you remain teachable after 47 years?
I hang out with lots of people who are new, and I try to share my experience, and I try to relate to them. You know, because they're the same people I hung out with when I was drinking.
Yeah.
And they're the same people that I hung out with when I got sober.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe what they're doing, you know, is a little bit different. Maybe they're not doing scotch. Maybe they're doing meth.
Yeah. Well, that's alcohol in any form, I believe.
Yeah. Right. But, you know, the way as alcoholics that we react is the same, you know, and when I see that, I understand it. And that's why, you know, I mean, this is going to sound bad, but I've got this kid who is 42, but to me, I mean, I'm 77, 42 seems like a kid, and he's having those problems, you know, and I understand why he's having those problems. And, you know, I have other people I work with who are in their 20s, you know, but it reminds me of where I come from.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
Absolutely. We do not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. And do you feel that working with somebody is not shutting the door on your past? Like, it helps you to stay in the moment and to continue to do service?
Sure. Whenever I look at a first step, you know, I have to see if that's still true for me. Whenever I listen to a fourth step, you know, I have to remember that I did that stuff too. And I have to share some of the stuff that I did, because otherwise I don't get people willing to talk to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
when I did my fifth step, what helped me feel comfortable was my sponsor told me a couple things, and I was like, wait, what a second, wait, you did stuff too? Okay, cool, I can do this.
Right.
And it does. And sometimes I think I forget, like when I see somebody with a lot of years, that hey, they did stuff too. We've all done stuff. We all have a past.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was a first meeting for all of us, at one point. And it was the 1,000-pound phone at one point, having to call somebody and say, help, because I never asked anyone for help. I didn't need to. I had a bottle of scotch.
Oh, there you go.
But yeah, everything is much the same.
Yeah.
I think in the world, even though it may look different.
Mm-hmm.
And people are much the same, even though they may look different. I mean, I'm 77, I'm looking at you, and you're wearing a Deftones shirt, and you have tattoos and a beard, and that's not what I grew up with.
Yeah, and we've got your sponsor Jared over here, and he's sitting here, and I see him. And how old are you, Jared? 36. All right.
Yeah, he doesn't look that old.
Yeah.
I've aged gracefully.
You've been preserved by preservatives.
Pickled. We call it. So when you I was sitting in a meeting today, and it was down at this Presbyterian church. It was a nooner, and it was all old timers. And I remember being in that meeting in 2012 and thinking, man, these people got issues. And I had done AA for like 3 days, right? And so I walked out and I shared that story today. For what they were sharing on happened to be, and it applied to that. So I raised my hand, I shared, and I was reminded real quick that in the beginning I didn't want this, and it took 10 more years of digging that bottom, to finally just say I've had enough. And I'm grateful to be here today. And how do you how do you keep yourself grateful all the time, Terry, after 47 years?
I go to a meeting every day.
Every day?
Yep, every day.
Wow.
And
yeah, I see you quite a few meetings.
I always run across people to talk to, and it keeps me grateful.
Yeah.
Because at least the meetings I go to, there are always new people coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And I realize, particularly here in Florida, that there are some meetings you can go to where everybody's been sober for 30 or 40 years.
Absolutely.
But those aren't the meetings that I'm attracted to.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to stay in the work.
Yeah. Yeah, the newcomer meeting. And I like newcomer meetings also because, and I remember one time I was in a meeting and I shared back when I was a newcomer, and this guy looked at me and he's like, I've got neckties longer than you've been sober. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've only been sober for almost a year now. And I was like, wow, that was kind of, and I realized kind of what he's talking about. It's like, if I don't remain teachable and always kind of still feel like the newcomer, like maybe I'm better than, then I might be a little screwed in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, if we don't remain teachable, then it gets dull, and it gets boring. Mm-hmm. And who wants to sit with a bunch of dull, boring people?
Yeah.
Not me,
The glum lot, right?
Right, no glum lots.
Yeah.
I would much rather, go find a lot that is not glum.
They talk about that on 132 in the big book. So what do you find yourself working on now in your recovery as you get more and more in time? Like, do you find yourself like you always find out things like, oh, I need to work on this, I need to work on that?
I don't think I find that specifically. I generally have about 4 people that I sponsor that are in their first year.
Oh, wow.
And so, I mean, we're going through steps and we're going through literature. And so I find myself doing that, I still read the big book, or the 12 and 12 every day, a couple pages as morning meditation. But sometimes I do that simply because I'm looking for a particular passage that I want to talk about.
When you first saw the big book, were you like, what is this? Do you remember your first thoughts about the big book?
I do not. I remember I mean, I've always been a book reader, literary, and those sorts of things. So I was fine with reading, and I think that's a problem for some people today because they're not fine with reading, and that's why I think it's good to do what we're doing tonight. Is other formats that allow people to apparently get messages.
Yeah, that's the beauty part of technology, is that you can get the word out, but it's also it's about the newcomer, and you're absolutely right about that. And so, is there anything that you would like to share for the newcomer? That any words for somebody maybe that's thinking about doing this or coming into the program that's brand new that might be listening to this? Any words of Terry 47 years wisdom?
Yeah, something you said over dinner. You hit bottom when you stop digging. So stop digging and come in.
Yeah, there's something that you said that I like. It actually, yeah, right. It's like, but sometimes I've noticed people come into the room still carrying a shovel. It's like, I'm not done yet. I was still carrying one in, and I was still deciding, like, am I done? Because I had this, like, oh, I got this, and I'm like, there's still a shovel right there. You can keep digging if you want. Here's $20. Go drink. Do you remember your first meeting?
No.
No.
I remember. Well, no, I don't even say it. I don't want to say I remember my first meeting. I remember meetings in the treatment center I was at, but I don't remember specifically a first one.
Mm-hmm. What was it like 40 years ago in AA?
Like it is today, but all the people were old.
Did you find them kind to you when you came in?
They were, yes, they were kind.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a long time when I was one other kid and I was 30 when I got sober. One other kid and I were the youngest people at this clubhouse that we were hanging out at, and I'm sure that we drove people crazy. But yeah, everybody was nice.
Everybody was nice to you. And were there any, one thing that kept me coming back in the beginning was like hearing about like old timers speaking and some of the hard lines that they took on stuff and the things that they would say in some of their sayings and like old school sponsor stories. What was your first sponsor like?
My first sponsor, I knew before I came into the program, because you had to have an AA person sponsor you to get you into the rehab that I went to.
Really?
Yeah. And he was an old bald man with white hair. I'm sure he wasn't as old as I am now, but he looked like an old man. He was 23 years sober actually at the time. Mm-hmm. And he was successful. He had a nice house and airplane and all this good stuff. But I liked him because he always seemed like no matter what happened, he would be okay. Mm-hmm. After the youngest of his kids got out of high school, I remember he said to his wife, I haven't wanted to live with you for a number of years now, and I am leaving. I'm leaving you the house and the plane and, everything.
Yeah.
And just walked out with the shirt on his back.
Wow.
And was fine,
Wow.
And so, if we do this, we have to believe it's going to work. Yeah. And that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. There's something I've heard you say in the meeting several times. This isn't for those that need it. It's for those that want it and who'll do I believe in your words, the damn deal.
That's not my words.
No, that's not the words?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
How does it go?
What I say is it isn't for people who want it, and it isn't for people who need it. It's for people who do it.
Oh, for do it. Yeah.
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 Because I hear all sorts of people say, oh, I need that. Or, oh, I want that. But that doesn't hack it.
Yeah.
We actually have to sit here and do this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really works.
Yeah, and you're talking the steps, service,
Yeah.
and
Sponsorship, go to meetings, all that good stuff.
yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Well, thank you for your time tonight, Terry, and I'm glad I could get your words wrong there.
You're good at that.
I have